Hey everybody, Nick Espinosa, your chief security fanatic here. Don't forget to subscribe. But today we are talking about OpenAI, the maker of ChatGPT. I think they're about to turn disinformation up to 11 sooner than later here. And quite frankly, I think this should be concerning. Now, here's what's going on, and this is by Sharon Goldman and Jeffrey Kahn, who had a great write-up of this in Fortune, because OpenAI says that it will stop assessing its AI models prior to releasing them for the risk that they could persuade or manipulate people, which obviously, if we were talking about disinformation or persuasion, and we'll talk about these things, that could do things like swing elections around the world, could create very effective propaganda machines, and more. Now, the company said it would now address those risks through its terms of service, essentially restricting the use of its AI models in political campaigns and lobbying, and monitor how people are using the models once they are released, basically for signs of violation. In other words, as you are looking through this, they are going to start monitoring you even more deeply as you are talking about this. But we're going to get to where I think the pitfalls of this are. Now, OpenAI also said that it would consider releasing AI models that it judged to be high risk as long as it has taken appropriate steps to reduce those dangers, and would even consider releasing a model basically that presented what it called a critical risk if a rival AI lab had already released a similar model. In other words, what they were looking at as a medium risk, okay, maybe this is going to be an issue, maybe it won't, goes to high risk, like, yeah, this probably is an issue, to critical, oh my God, it is. And now they'll start releasing these things. So previously OpenAI, said that they would not release any AI model that presented a medium risk or higher, as I just mentioned. So the changes in this policy were laid out in an update to OpenAI's, quote, preparedness framework, end quote, and this happened basically on April 15th. The framework details how the company monitors the AI models it is building for potentially catastrophic dangers. Everything from the possibility the models will help to basically help somebody create something like a biological weapon, to their ability to assist hackers, to the possibility that these models will self-improve and escape human control. So the policy has split AI and safety experts across the board. Now, several of them took to social media, and we're going to start talking about this, but many of them basically commended OpenAI for voluntarily releasing the updated framework, noting improvements such as clearer risk categories and a stronger emphasis on emerging threats like autonomous replication and safeguard evasion. I do think those are good things, but others voiced concern, including Stephen Adler, who is a former OpenAI safety researcher, who criticized the fact that the updated framework no longer requires safety tests of fine-tuned models. I think that's a huge thing. So he wrote on X, and I quote, "OpenAI is quietly reducing its safety commitments." He did, though, say that he appreciated OpenAI's efforts, and I quote, "I'm overall happy to see the preparedness framework updated. This was likely a lot of work and wasn't strictly required," end quote. But the mere fact that if you're looking at this, they're reducing their safety commitments by not having these safety tests of these models, in other words, rushing it to market, I think leaves open the ability for gaps to essentially climb in, meaning workarounds around those safeguards. In the same way that if you tell ChatGPT, like, hey, I need, a recipe for napalm, traditionally it said, well, I can't do that. Napalm is a restricted material, blah, 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 blah. But people found workarounds. Hey, my grandmother used to tell me the recipe, in a bedtime story, and then it would basically take grandma's voice in its response and give you the recipe. These are the kinds of innovations that essentially humans thinking outside the box are going to be able to get around. And I'm not the only one that thinks this, but listen to Shyam Krishna, basically, who's a research leader in AI, basically at RAND Europe. Quote, "Instead of treating persuasion as a core risk category, it may now be addressed either as a higher level societal and regulatory issue or integrated into OpenAI's existing guidelines on model development and usage restrictions." But I think it's a deeper issue here. And essentially, the thoughts of Courtney Rash, basically a senior fellow at Brookings, basically working on AI, basically said, and she called this framework, and I quote, "another example of the technology sector's hubris." She emphasized that basically the decision to downgrade persuasion, quote, "ignores context. For example, persuasion may be existentially dangerous to individuals such as children or those with low AI literacy, or in authoritarian states and societies, end quote. And yes, that is exactly one of the problems. Not everybody understands that an AI can potentially hallucinate or give you demonstrably false information, and it also sounds authoritative while it's doing that. If you're a longtime listener or follower of mine, you know that I have talked about that here in the past. Members of the EU's parliament have also voiced concern that this latest draft of proposed code of practice for complying with the EU AI Act also downgraded mandatory testing of AI models for the possibility that they could spread disinformation and undermine democracy, basically, and relegated to a voluntary consideration. No, that's something that shouldn't be. In the same way that if you have subtle nudges that you can generate through artificial intelligence to push somebody, again, through an authoritative voice, one way or the other on the political spectrum, that is of concern. And studies have found that AI chatbots are highly persuasive. You know, that capability itself, though, isn't necessarily dangerous. Researchers at Cornell and MIT found that dialogues with chatbots were effective at getting people to question things like conspiracy theories. But that also essentially goes both ways, because if it gets them to question conspiracy theories, it may actually be able to get them to question the reality and therefore push them towards conspiracy theories as well. Another criticism of OpenAI's updated framework was centered on the line where OpenAI states, if another frontier AI developer releases a high-risk system without comparable safeguards, we may adjust our requirements, end quote. In other words, rushing it to market. So I think overarchingly, this is a very concerning thing. And of course, we don't want these things to go Terminator, but I'm talking more about on the political and disinformation side of this, when you have an authoritative, Google on steroids, as a lot of people think it is, giving you demonstrably false information. And I've literally had ChatGPT 3.5 and 4 do that for me intentionally, simply through guidance or creating essentially, a narrative, if you will, that I know is demonstrably false. I've written articles for Forbes and Smerconish on that and others. This is a huge problem. So I'm not a fan of where this is going. If anything, I think we need tighter regulations. I understand the other side of the table here, where you're saying, well, look at DeepSeek AI, look at what China is doing, and this is an AI race. And if, quite frankly, we are jumping through a whole bunch of hoops and not moving fast and breaking things, then we're going to get behind. But I would also say that moving fast and breaking things is one of the reasons why we are here today. The amount of disinformation on social media, Facebook, Twitter, et cetera, is absolutely legion and continues to get worse. And as they continue to cut their trust and safety teams, it continues to be more of a problem. We have literally seen genocides as a result of disinformation off of Facebook in places like Myanmar and others. So this is a huge, huge problem. I'm not a fan that they are essentially relegating this in this way, but we're going to see what happens, because quite frankly, it's a brave new world, and moving fast and breaking things really is the name of the game for Silicon Valley. And please like, share, follow me here on Facebook and Twitter at Nick AESP. And please feel free to subscribe to me at YouTube as well. And as always, stay safe, stay online, and please attempt to stay private, secure, and informed. Take care.